Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the tale of an impossible machine. We are talking about an aircraft that literally defied the accepted laws of physics. It dominated the skies, struck terror into its adversaries, and yet it birthed this surprisingly peaceful modern legacy. A legacy that, believe it or not, you might actually have parked in your driveway right now. Yep, we're talking about the legendary Mitsubishi A6M Zero.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to cover 6 parts of this massive engineering narrative, starting with the impossible fighter specification, then a bargain with physics, ruling the Pacific skies, the fatal flaw revealed, a weapon of desperation, and finally, from warplanes to automobiles.
Section 1. The impossible fighter specification. Define the laws of nature.
So, to really understand the Zero, we've got to put ourselves back in 1937. Back then, every Navy on Earth just accepted that carrier fighters had to be compromised. Why? Well, to survive the brutal, slamming shock of landing on a moving ship, an aircraft had to be built heavy. And heavy meant they were slower, they climbed worse, and they had a much shorter range compared to land-based fighters. The Americans and the British, they basically accepted this as a rigid law of nature. But the Imperial Japanese Navy, they looked at those rules and just refused to accept them. They started issuing demands that completely violated the known limits of physics and aircraft design.
I mean, just look at the metrics they demanded. They were absolutely staggering. They wanted a plane that could outrun and outmaneuver all land-based fighters. It needed massive firepower, specifically 2 20mm cannons and 2 machine guns. Oh, and it needed an unheard-of range of 6 to 8 hours. That's a 1,500-mile round trip. It had to climb to 3,000 meters in exactly 3.5 minutes, hit 500 kilometers per hour, and yet the wingspan had to stay under 12 meters, just so it could fit on a ship's elevator. When the rival manufacturer Nakajima looked at these numbers, they literally concluded they were physically impossible and just walked away from the table. That left only one man at the Mitsubishi empire bold enough to try and solve it, a 34-year-old engineer named Jiro Horikoshi.
Which brings us to Section 2, a bargain with physics, the obsession of Jiro Horikoshi.
Now, Horikoshi realized pretty quickly that to meet these totally impossible demands, he had to pull off an extreme weight reduction strategy. A defining mantra emerged for the whole project: where can I remove weight? And this wasn't just a casual thought, it was an obsessive question applied to every single rivet, every single structural member. You see, Japanese aero engines at the time produced about 20 to 30% less power than their Western equivalents, so the only way to win was through extreme, unrelenting discipline. Horikoshi turned to a brand new revolutionary aluminum alloy called extra super duralumin, or T7178. This stuff allowed for thinner, much lighter structural joints. He built the wings using a single continuous spar and basically fused the engine, cockpit, and wings into one rigid, incredibly light unit.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the final result of all that extreme math: 3,740 pounds. That is the empty weight of the Zero. To put that into perspective for you, its primary American adversary, the Grumman F4F Wildcat, weighed a massive 5,758 pounds empty. That means the Zero was nearly a full ton lighter. It literally weighed less than many modern midsize cars do today. And you know, this wasn't some happy accident. This was Horikoshi's brilliant extreme engineering at work.
Moving on to Section 3, ruling the Pacific skies, absolute dominance.
When Horikoshi's machine finally took flight, the consequences were, well, devastating. His math was proven entirely correct. In September 1940, which is over a year before Pearl Harbor, Zeros debuted in China. Just 13 Zeros engaged 27 Chinese fighters and destroyed all of them without taking a single loss, a 27-to-0 kill ratio. Now, here's the crazy part. Western analysts actually received intelligence reports about this from Claire Chennault, but they completely dismissed them. Out of pure technological arrogance and, frankly, racial prejudice, they just didn't believe Japanese industry could build a world-class fighter. And that ignorance? It cost thousands of lives when the Zero struck Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies, basically sweeping the skies clear of Allied resistance.
During those first 6 months of the Pacific War, the Zero achieved an estimated kill ratio of 12 to 1. That's 12 Allied aircraft destroyed for every single Zero lost. Master pilots like Saburo Sakai described this unarmored, lightweight fighter as an extension of their own bodies in dogfights. Literally nothing could outclimb it. Nothing could outturn it. It was, for sure, absolute dominance.
Section 4, the fatal flaw revealed. A sword with no shield.
So,
The crucial point is that Horikoshi's engineering miracle came with a terrifying catch. All that unmatched agility had a devastating cost. The Zero had absolutely zero armor behind the pilot and zero self-sealing fuel tanks. Remember that obsessive weight reduction? Well, every single gram of weight removed for performance was a gram of protection the pilot simply didn't have. While Western fighters could take a nasty hit and still limp home, a single burst of machine gun fire into a Zero would instantly ignite its unprotected fuel tanks, or just kill the pilot outright. Horikoshi had effectively purchased ultimate performance at the cost of ultimate vulnerability.
Once the Allies figured this out, they systematically dismantled the Zero's advantage in 3 distinct steps. First up, tactically. Pilots learned that you never ever try to outturn a Zero. Instead, they used the thatch weave, which was this crisscrossing defensive flight pattern, to totally neutralize its agility. Second, intelligence. In June 1942, a 19-year-old Japanese pilot crash-landed in the Aleutian Islands. The Americans captured his nearly intact Akutan Zero, reverse-engineered the whole thing, and mapped out every single structural weakness. And third, industrial might. The U.S. just started churning out massive, heavily armored fighters packing 2,000 horsepower engines, planes like the Hellcat, the Corsair, and the P-38. They were designed specifically to exploit the Zero's complete lack of armor.
Section 5. A weapon of desperation. The tragic pivot.
By 1944, the aircraft that had once completely owned the skies was frankly entirely obsolete. The reality was devastating. The experienced Japanese pilots were largely dead, replaced by boys with just mere weeks of training. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Zeros were slaughtered so easily that American pilots notoriously called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. And then, in a stark, tragic pivot in October 1944, this airplane, designed for absolute aerial superiority, was transformed into an expendable kamikaze weapon. They loaded it with a 550-pound bomb to be deliberately crashed into ships.
Horikoshi had to watch his masterpiece become a guided missile. Privately, he was completely devastated. He actually wrote in his diaries, bereft of any strong move to seek a way out, Japan was being driven to doom. You know, he had solved this impossible engineering problem because he was utterly consumed by it. But he never designed his perfect airplane to just be thrown away, or to sit back and watch it consume his own country.
Which leads us to our final part. Section 6. From warplanes to automobiles. A surprising rebirth.
Let's move on and see how this builds. Because after Japan's surrender, the factories were just rubble. The occupation forces completely banned aircraft manufacturing. This forced an incredible post-war pivot. In 1946, the Mitsubishi conglomerate was dissolved. Think about it. The very engineers who designed the world's most advanced, terrifying carrier fighter were suddenly out of a job. So what did they do? They pivoted to building delivery trucks and a tiny little motorized scooter called the Silver Pigeon. Kind of a massive downgrade, right? But eventually, the occupation ended, the companies reintegrated, and in April 1970, Mitsubishi Motors was formally spun off as its own independent company.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real legacy of Jiro Horikoshi. It's how that intense engineering culture simply transferred over. That extreme weight reduction discipline used for the Zero, it created incredibly lightweight car bodies. The engineers who used to calculate stress loads on wing spars just started calculating stress loads on suspension arms instead. Their deep institutional knowledge of aerodynamics birthed precision-engineered sedans. This absolute obsession with structural efficiency directly translated into incredibly rugged cars that would, decades later, go on to conquer the brutal Dakar Rally.
You can see this DNA directly in the 1960 Mitsubishi 500. This was the first true passenger car from the company, and it weighed an astonishingly light 490 kilograms. That extreme weight-saving culture of the Nagoya Works manifested perfectly in this tiny 21-horsepower civilian car.
This right here is what we call engineering DNA. You see, Horikoshi's work was never a failure of engineering. Yes, his machine was devastating for a short war, even if his nation couldn't survive a long one. But the factory survived, the engineers survived, and most importantly, their culture survived. Today, the Mitsubishi Group takes that exact same DNA and builds everything from your living room air conditioner to the rockets that launch satellites into space.
Which leaves us with this final thought. If the relentless pursuit of perfection can build both a devastating weapon of war and the foundations of a global civilian transport empire, what impossible problem will this engineering DNA solve next? Next time you look at the vehicles driving past you on the highway, remember the invisible history, the extreme mathematics, and the absolute obsession that went into their DNA. Thanks for exploring this piece of history with us.